We in the information age, but really what that means is oversaturated. Like podcasts in the rap scene is confusing. Whether you're going live or you're zooming, you ain't on the same page. So you read what the room thinks, and the room thinks too many words. And every word is personal, and when it's in type, it's even worse. If you're misunderstood, and it's just how it works. So I'm a hypocrite, just like the rest of the earth. And racists think you hate them, so they gotta hate you first. Miscegenation is a crime, melting pot is a urn. They want us normal and ignorable, killing to burn. Sexism isn't a two-way street, listen to her. And slutting gonna use as an excuse for a slur. Don't blame it on the evil, it's just people who hurt. You get what you got, whether you got you deserve. You gotta explain it all, even the obvious worth. Don't fixate on the clickbait, give it a wide berth. The truth is out there, not inside where you lurk. Welcome to the Museum of Dead Words, where we've been bringing you, me, your tour guide, Dialect, and alongside Pamela Capallet, Christine Crouch, and Andrew D. Scoville, for the last few years, pouring through online conversations to find words that kill discussion and ruin discourse. We dub these words dead and have been infiltrating art galleries, co-working spaces, and lately even your own living rooms and homes to show how these words died and why it matters. This is the end of the online series where we've spent a week with each word, 11 weeks now. Blueprints in Progress, where we were rocking on Tuesdays. We got deep into how a word dies. And on Thursdays, the main event, which is a collaboration with artists from around the world to share their experiences with these words. If you know a word or a phrase that has died or may be in danger, please share it in chat, add to the Dead Word bucket on museumofdeadwords.com, or even DM me. Reach me, find me. I'm easy to find. A little about the museum. We opened when your mouths did, and thanks to the generous contribution of millions of donors like you, we've been able to identify and catalog a growing list of words in the English language that have fallen into disuse. In this language, it's kind of hard to tell when a word has stopped working. And I gotta let you know, we're using the rhyme and the rhythm and the symmetry to keep these words connected. Words don't actually mean anything until we give them power by infusing them with tone and cadence. This is no more true than with the final word in our museum, truth, a word that came about around 1560 and died somewhere around the 1980s and has been trudging its behind through these things ever since. The sad thing about truth is related not only to trust, but loyalty, fidelity, and reliability. Veracity. We are very connected to the truth. And when we lose our ability to be connected to the truth, we lose our ability to be connected to each other. And we can't be connected to each other, our truths become personal. When our truths become personal, we're islands without any port. We're going to get into some of the work that we've been doing. And I worked with Demostina, who is, an old and dear friend, if y'all don't know, an amazing artist, multidisciplinary, is doing lots of great work. And I want to share the work that she has done before we have a conversation about how she got there. So check these pieces out right here. Fading down is never all that great, but that's beautiful art, and we'd like to welcome Demostina. Demo, thank you for sharing your art.
What's up?
And thank you for being a part of this and jamming with the museum. So, first of all, I want to ask you about the piece itself. I'm going to bring it back up because we can do that. And tell me about this piece and how you ended up putting this together. So I see a lot of stuff going on here. I see paint. I see some paper. So it looks like you did some glue into some paper. There's like a bingo thing going on with the dates. Talk to me about what's happening.
Yeah, man, there's a lot of layers in this sandwich, my man. So what's up? What's up? Always good to see you. So far, how do I go about this? You know that throughout this whole process, we were talking about my version at the initial part of this whole collaboration. I was looking at this as a mandala because I really felt like truth really, you could really slice it up, fragment it into a million pieces because we're all some version of it, right? And we're all speaking our own versions of the truth, and you speak your truth. And like you said, at some point, you start to create these barriers. At least that's what I have found. So I thought, okay, if I can dissect this visually, I have to take imagery like, figures, body parts, recognizable things out of it. And let me just focus on the geometry to see how I can overlay sections of how we do connect. But I wanted to speak through colors. But the funny thing is, those dots that you see are actually old bingo sheets. And it's really because I realized, oh my gosh, you ever been in a conversation and you start talking and you don't really resonate until it hits you because you made a connection. It was like a personal connection to that person's truth. And then I thought that almost feels like when you got bingo, like, oh, bingo, that was me. That is, you know what I'm saying? So I brought that element in. Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say, bingo isn't that one of those games where like it becomes more about if you can anticipate what the person dropping things is doing. Like you're like, listen, it's like, oh, they've got a rhythm to how they drop it, so I got to find it in there. So yeah, that's and I do feel you on that.
Yeah, and then I started really dissecting more profoundly this whole idea of our chakras and like how our truths are often like tinged with some part of idealism, like, oh, I want this to be the truth. So I'm just going to go with that. I'm comfortable here. I feel safe here. But is that true safety? And I know that that's something that's been tossed around a lot. I see a lot of communities trying to become more authentic and trying to be more transparent and just, even if it hurts, speak your truth. So I just started thinking to myself, what if I took these colors and I address them as chakra points, right? So you've got red, which usually starts at the root. And we're kind of like speaking from that space a lot. People want to get this bag. They feel like they're lacking. They're fearing, loss of home, shelter, even like what you're going to eat in the next day or next month. We just kind of like came to the end of a year with a crazy pandemic that has torn people to pieces. And it just got me thinking about like, where are we really addressing our truth from at this point in time? Just even from when the beginning of this collaboration series started to now, it changed a lot for me. I was like, oh my God, we're scared. We're scared. And some of us are really trying not to live through that fear. But that's like a very root chakra space. That's not true. No, it's a perception.
That's really dope. And there's something, I mean, I'm pulling a little bit ahead because I'm really loving the chakra stuff. It just made me think about a headline I saw today about over in Rockaway, they put together one of those fridges for like anybody to come, just
yes,
mutual aid
fridge. Got one uptown. Right.
And then somebody picked it up and threw it into the water. They like destroyed it. And I know that there are people who will say that it's common sense. It is true, and it is believable that if you try to create something for free, that people will destroy it, that it will be torn down. And I'm like, that similarly, like as you're talking about, it feels like someone has idealized their own jealousy and like to make it true. And like people will like go to great lengths to make these things true. They don't necessarily have to be.
Yo, you just like so hit a nail for me. Okay, so one of the conversation threads, I'm going to call them threads, that I kept coming into contact with was this idea that it is what it is, to each his own. So we're still going to have violence. We're still going to have people hating on the next. We're still going to have, no matter how hard you work, you might not hit those millions, or you might not get that house, or, you just that greatness in your mind that we all feed each other. You could be great. Like, what is that? And it used to piss me off, really. I used to be like, wait, so you don't believe that there's like true energy and working towards something and ridding yourself of so much negativity so that you can attract more abundance in your life. So you're saying that no matter what, it's just going to be, the survival of the fittest mode all day, every day. And these people really held fast to their convictions. They were like, yeah, it's black and white, and then they would put examples like, do you see anything different happening from like 100 years ago in politics that you're not seeing now? I'm like, okay, you definitely have a point there. We still see corruption. We still see, propaganda of some sort to distort truth so that it can influence. But, to what degree are we not biased already? So I just kind of felt like, if you're going to go to great lengths to destroy somebody's goodwill, or generosity, or, for the greater good of a community, it really made me think about, are we ever going to really elevate communities? Are we really, like, I grew up in Washington Heights and I'm still seeing things going down right at the fine line of condos going up out the roof. You know what I mean? Like, just totally.
They didn't change things?
Like, the Giuliani days, man, people had hope. And even with, like, it doesn't matter, so to a certain degree, that might be true. It might be true. Like, hey, maybe there is this weird hierarchy of this is the law of the universe. Like, there will be struggle, there will be chaos and order coexisting because they can't exist without the other. So I'm like, damn, that means I have to accept the what's going down in this community, when I'm not feeling safe about it, or that, what we saw in the summer with the whole Black Lives Matter movement at its peak, I'd say we have to accept that because the reality is that universe is talking about order versus chaos, right? Non-violence versus violence. So everything is this duality. It just really got very touchy, People brought it into this idea of that spite that you speak of, even into relationships, dude. Like, I saw a couple, and I've been following this for like 2 years now. She was telling me, the wife in the situation is a friend of mine, and she was just saying, we have very politically different views. Her and her husband, one was gearing towards more of a Trump view, supporting him. She's like totally anti. And I said, well, that's your version of the truth. She said, yeah, but he can't understand that this is not okay. And I'm like, but he's not even asking you if it's okay because his version of things comes from a different platform. Like, he was thinking more on the economics. She's talking about the humanitarian. So again, it's like this stuff really does tear people apart. Once that little personal truths come in, like, relationships can die from that.
One of the words that nearly ended up in the museum was the word political or politics, because, politics as not a proper noun, not talking about like our structural politics.
Right.
Yeah, they play in politics or the politics of the office. Politics often meant the minutia that means a lot to some people, but because it matters to some people, they're now going to make it mean a lot to all people. And it's tough to reconcile because now when people talk about politics or political stuff, I think people have purposely expanded the definition to make it hard to decide what is actually true and correct about your feelings, your beliefs, and the things that you want to happen. Because someone can say, oh, economic stuff is what matters to me, not your social stuff. But it ignores the direct connections between our social activities, what our common sense things are. We've been talking about how art and media, perpetuate what is common sense and what are social mores, and how it's related to money stuff. I mean, when we talk about, the black, white, and specifically like the Irish police thing, where like, oh, why are Irish people stereotyped as cops? Because when the Irish indentured servants, they were like, we'll give you a little bit more power so that you can lord over the black people. And that was an economic decision. It wasn't a social decision. But now people think of as a very social thing that is somehow distanced from the economics. You know what I mean?
Yes. Again, that distortion of the truth. It's like, oh, well, we're just going to accept this because this distortion has become the norm. And it's like brilliant. When you think about it, it's like a brilliant way. We're doing this organically, dialect. Like, how are we perpetuating this without even realizing that we're doing it? That's the part that's really like getting to me, because I'm just wondering if there's any way that you can really accept that. If you have like the whole police community I grew up like that. Like, again, there was the hero, right? But I did notice that. I'm like, oh, a lot of you guys, and the fire department, I was like, wow, a lot of you guys do seem to have, Irish roots. I'm like, is this how it is? And then every now and then, if I saw like a Black or Latino cop, I'd be wondering, like, so what was that process like? Because my experience was completely on the negative. Like, they were the cops of color were the ones that were getting, I don't know, you're gonna say like attacked or whatever by like, the streets. Like the streets had it out for you. But I wasn't seeing that with like the white cops. So my version of that, I didn't want any parts to this end. Like my mom was telling me the other day, do you remember that one situation? There was like when I lived in a completely different household with other family members when I was younger, and there was like a police incident that I remember so vividly, and it was because they didn't look like us, and they were there in the house, like because they didn't look like us, and I was just like, and this is my truth. I did not have like, hi, good morning, young lady. That we didn't have that. It was just constantly like Washington Heights, FBI, the midnight raid or whatever in the 80s. In the early 90s, it was just crazy, like nothing positive. But you see, with the history that you're telling me, it's sort of like, okay, so now we're shifting that. Now we want to talk about treating our mental health cases a lot more humanely, right? What's the truth there, right? How do you even go about that, going into a household or having a conversation with a family member who has a fellow family member in crisis? You know what I'm saying? And their truth is like distorted because of those economic changes and all the stuff that you see in a community that's disenfranchised. Like, I don't know. It's like a rabbit hole dialect. And I'm just thinking to myself, I definitely got to keep working visuals around this, because now I'm interested in looking at pieces of sections of how truth is affecting family, romantic relationships, the idea of love. We talked about that a little bit earlier. I want to talk about how this politically intertwines. And then on a global scale, what are those commonalities? Even in the more strict of government structures.
I love where you're going. Yeah. Stuff. I want to get a little structure about like how you went about these things. So I know that you interviewed people. And you talked about you interviewed your mom. How many people did you end up interviewing? And like, was there a specific pattern you were going for, or was it just like whoever was in your space? Because especially I know now it's like, run up on the street and be like, let's talk.
Initially, I was going for, it did change actually. It became very restricting. Initially, I was going for like social experimenting. I thought, where can I go and just drop? I had this conversation with Kristen, like, where can I drop some post-its or something where people would just write what their thoughts were on universal truth. What did that even mean to them? And I was willing to take any language. I'm in a very predominantly Spanish-speaking neighborhood, and I thought that might be pretty interesting to see culturally how that shifts. So what started to happen was that there was no way I could do that. Just too many restricting movements, very limited contact. So I started doing this organically, where if I was in an Uber cab, I must have gone through like 15 of them since the early fall, and then like minus like a few conversations in the summer that I remember, just because I always think about like people's personalities and their views. And then I would say the rest were between colleagues, family, and my personal relationships and things that I was reading, like what do you want to call it? Like maybe 30 people in total. From different, like these are just different levels though. Like sometimes it would be, oh my God, this person's upset. So I had one situation where this was the version of the truth. This is a young person, college kid. College kid feels their version of themselves is very distorted. And I was trying to intervene, but the conversation went to a place of, well, how do you really see yourself? And who told you that? Where's that coming from, right? There was this whole thing of like how the ego for her is very fragile, but what she's been told has shaped how she sees herself, And like that just got me thinking about my own students that I work with. I was just like, are they believing all the hype that's happening with the pandemic? That was another conversation, just like hearing voices of the complaints that I was hearing. So that was more indirect. I was just taking notes like, okay, so they obviously don't believe that the elections are going to go down the way they did, and now they're shocked, or they actually don't believe that they're going to be okay or safety. So there was this idea of safety that sprawled into me asking my partner. You know, I asked him questions like, for example, these are the big ones. How do we survive if we're constantly on one side of the fence? Like, if all you're seeing is the same thing all day, where are you really growing? You know, and his thing was
fighting in.
Yeah, like, you know, those cortisol levels are just high, just off the chain. That kind of spiraled into me asking my mom. That started opening into the elders. That's how this whole thing happened. Like, my circle was so tight because I can't just go everywhere right now, you know, and I've got the little ones, right, these twins, which that was interesting because I wanted to see how they see their world, but, you know, that's a language issue. But with my mom, it became a conversation of, generationally speaking, I learned that she was dumbfounded when I asked her about what a universal truth, period. Yeah. Like, the fact that she could not respond. So this is a point in this research that I said, oh my God, there must be so many more in her shoes. This is a 74-year-old woman. I started asking other elders, La Bodega. I would ask my neighbors, just like, you know, hey, how you doing? Going up the elevator, got the mask, you know, just doing all this. And I'm like, this is a crazy world. And it would always spoon off of the pandemic. So right now, our truths are linked by this pandemic, right? That was one thing. Mm-hmm. That was one thing. And from there, I would say, you know, well, what's your take on this? Like, do you feel that there's something else that's bigger that's binding us? Do you feel like it's separating us? You know, and I noticed that culturally and definitely generationally, they haven't been pushed to think like that. So when I asked my mom and my aunt and these neighbors that were much older, and I did lose a few neighbors to COVID, they just said, I've never been asked to think that deep. Like, that really blew my mind. And I didn't know what to say to that. I was just like, damn, that says a lot. That's a lot of people from that same generation, my man. Like, you know, mm-hmm. That's shaping how thoughts, conversations, ideas have influenced the younger, hence us, right? And then how we influence the rest. So
that makes me think when you're talking about the cortisol and all that, and like, you know, yeah. A lot of marginalized and traumatized communities have people who like live their whole life with the amygdala just popped. It's just like
exactly
all the time. And think about your aunties or some of y'all, your mom and your dad and people around you who are like screaming at you about every single thing. I had one of my cousins, like his mom, exactly. She was always terrified about everything. I would bring my little dog over, my little tiny, little friendly dog. And every time I brought my dog over, she'd be like, I thought that dog was bigger. I thought your dog was so big.
Yeah.
In her mind, everything was so huge. And you couldn't slip up in the slightest way. And if you did, they'd be like, look, because if you slip up, they're going to come get you. And it makes me wonder with what you were saying about like the pandemic and us now and talking to the elders, if there might be, like we're talking about universal truths, maybe that's difficult, but maybe there are generational truths. You know how people talk about like they were a product of their time and stuff like that. So did you get that from some of this?
Yes. All the time, by the way, like even before this whole like awesome opportunity. So the truths were like for her, for instance, because she was the point of departure there, she was like, I don't understand, you know, you have to do things well. Like it's like their truth was like in the sense of quality, like things being done well. Things being done with a sense of urgency, things being done like nobody wants something that was like half-hearted. So it got me thinking, because this is the thing, look, to give you a little perspective, I'm seeing older folks where they want everyone to take care of them. Right. And then there's mom who takes care of everybody. Mm-hmm. And I said, how do these two personas share their truths, right? So she's saying, you can't do things half-heartedly. You got to go all in or not. Like, if you're going to do it with a sense of just don't do it. Like, there's no time for hypocrisy. So nobody wants that. The same thing happened with my uncle. And my uncle has a whole different storyline behind him. He's a little younger. But in his case, he was like, you got to take things with a grain of salt. It feels like generationally, everything is about, you can't take everything at once. We're so busy being overwhelmed. Oh, and also there was this truth that it was very religious. even though they weren't necessarily, like, you know, like heavily involved, like heavy churchgoers or like going to, you know, holding fast to those religious beliefs, but they did feel like there was this higher power guiding everything. So my mom would say things like, girl, you know, the world is ending. Girl, the world is ending. And they all say this, like they all say this no matter what. These are the times. So I noticed that generationally, they are very, 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 very much programmed by those religious early upbringings. They were going to the...
Well, and also, as you're saying, you know, and I want to ask a little more about the religious stuff, but taking the grain of salt, and as we're talking about safety, this is not, this is a really old idiom that people don't really know the origins of definitively, but one of the hypotheses about it is that salt being an antidote for certain types of poison. So saying statement with a grain of salt is a metaphor for, you know, having this thing to counteract what could hurt you.
Right. And so it's, again, like you said, it's a way to like create safety barriers or to buffer it a little bit. Right. But that's their thing. Like she would come back and she'll say you're really stressed out. Like she'll say, drink a glass of water. It just seems like it goes back to these organic places. You know, it goes back to nature. It goes back to have respect for nature, that we are all part of it. But at the same time, there are these like religious constructs that just really shape everybody. Like, you can't do that because that's against God.
The same religion that you when you talked about, was it mostly all the same religion? Or
yeah, the majority of it was mostly Catholic, Christian, you know, beliefs. There were like about maybe 4 people that did not practice Christianity, and they didn't really address their belief systems, but I know they definitely didn't, you know what I mean? They didn't go there. But it was funny because most of the conversations were not religiously driven until I got to the generational thing, you know?
Okay.
So I noticed the shift right away. I'm like, oh, wow. So maybe me and my peers, because a lot of them were 30s, 40s, like that. I said, oh my gosh, like we're like the transition generation. There's something about the 30s, 40s, especially I would say 40, where we're at right now. There's a shift, man. And I started feeling like I'm being pulled in so many directions, but I'm really trying to undo all that programming through the same process. So this allowed me to sit with discomfort, because I had to deal with how my parents raised me, which wasn't super religious, but they were tinged with, you know, those like you said, like, oh my God is going to punish me. Or like, is it really true? I was questioning these things. And thank God that this woman was very open to talking about it. But I actually was bold enough to say, has anyone ever asked you a question like that? Something that's beyond like what was in a book or what you know was passed down to you? Not to discredit, you know, the passed down stories. Like there's a lot of that. We have big time storytellers, but she wasn't pushed to think in that way. And she's a thinker. So now she's telling me, she's like, you know, this is the stuff that's supposed to affect change. And now I see what you're talking about. Like when people are talking about, you know, we got to raise the vibration and all of that. She didn't get any of that until I started pushing her thinking. So in my book, I was just like, okay, if people of my generation, our generation, are more open to various truths, why are we still pumping the speak your truth stuff? Like we're doing it, you know, like surprising.
So did you get any stuff from your peers that you talked to about why you think people are still clinging to personal truth?
I noticed that the people that were more social media minded, they were, and that was a combination. Some were colleagues, some were, you know, just regular friendship circles. They kind of feel that it's the era, the access to words. We're separating ourselves, you know, because we're allowed to construct our realities. So if I want, even changing my background, like if I want to change my background, it now affects me psychologically. I feel like I'm part of this environment and I want to hide or disguise parts of myself to the point where how much is left of you in there, of the reality as you knew it before, right?
Wow.
So
as you put yourself into this bigger thing, that goes to a lot of assimilation and appropriation, right?
Exactly.
Like, how do you maintain yourself? I remember as a kid, you know, being, you know, Black in passing, like one of the things that I did know is like we had our language. There were these things that we said that no one else would say. And now I go on social media and you see a white K-pop fan from Iowa talking about Woo Child. And they're like, what? Where did you get that from? And it's weird because I feel like it's weird because you want to be able to share yourself, your life, your culture. Right. But in certain instances, when I guess because I don't know that person and we're not in the same room, it felt like it was something was taken from me rather than something that I shared willingly.
Right. Yeah. See, that's what I felt like was that battle. I don't know if that was ego and that higher self, but it was definitely obvious to me by like halfway through. I said, oh my God, like we're experiencing a shift, but it's also the discomfort of who wants to share and recognize that, I'm going to own the fact that I am recreating my reality. And we also take power in it. Like, here's one example. For a long time, I had a close circle of friends that would be like, we should get together and do this, what do you call it? The vision boards, right?
Yeah.
Damn, I'm mad that I didn't talk about this before. But this is a thing, right? Vision boards, it's to put us in this mindset of attracting, right? So we can shift our thinking, like we're attracting. And I kept saying, oh my God, no matter what, the universal truth around that was always similar. If it was a relationship, they wanted the marriage, they wanted to have like the nice house. It's like the same picture over and over again. And then in some cases, I did see that some friends of mine really, they manifested that like fairly quickly, like the whole 9. I was just like, whoa. But it's that same carbon copy idea of like, what is love? What is the idea of an ideal family unit? What does it mean to be really happy? What does it mean to be really happy? It's either you got all this money or this stature like around the material or this humble internal joy that you're feeling. There was no in between. There was no, I don't mind having some money, and still be humble with mine. They were like, nah, I need to go all out. Or people would tell me, I just want to be free of illness, especially now. I want to be healthy. Oh, so now we don't want the money anymore because now your priority is, you know what I'm saying? So
what's ill about that? I wanted to jump in real quick and say about the vision boards. Vision boards to me, in my experience, are like, when you party with your friends and your friend is like blackout drunk and they're telling you about all the awesome stuff they're going to do in their life, and then like they wake up the next day and they don't even remember it. That's what vision boards are for me. I've read a little about this, and there is a certain phenomenon about how some brains work where when I make my vision board, I get the positive response in my brain of accomplishing the feat when I haven't even accomplished it. So like a lot of times when I've made vision boards and stuff like that, then I won't go and do the thing at all. I won't manifest nothing because my body's like, you did it, you're good.
I so get it. For me, it's like, I want this. Like, this is what I want, But then I catch myself curating it in a way that I'm asking myself, is this realistic? Because supposedly you're supposed to go all out. Like, it's whatever you want, right? Whatever you want to manifest. But I end up curating it. I scrutinize the vision board that's supposed to be all or nothing. And then I do feel that sense of like joy by like visually taking it in. I do feel that sense of accomplishment. But then I get motivated like, all right, this is just right. It wasn't too greedy. Like, you hear what I'm saying? Like the fact that I'm saying that it's such a vulnerable thing for me. And for people who I've seen experience it, like I've done this stuff even like around colleagues. Like we all tried it out. Like, let's just try this little therapy moment. And that's what I kept seeing over and over again. It was like, do I even deserve this image in my vision board? Like, is that the version of yourself that's speaking from strength, or like somebody put that in your mind a long time ago? Like, how do we even gauge what we deserve? You know what I'm saying? For me, it's been about everybody has had their version and everyone has either allowed themselves to think about a universal truth. But for me, I kept saying, let me take layers of transparencies like tracing paper. Let me take layers of gifts. So that's all gift wrapping paper. Everything that you see there for the most part, except for the newspaper and the bingo.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
You painted all the paper?
those are all like, and I've had them for a long time. You know, I try to keep that. You know me, I love collaging, so I'm gonna keep these textures. I was like, they have to be very like meaningful in that sense and translucent. So when I first started, I was like, what happens when I use color as a vibration? So we know that when you're dealing with, let's say, like the solar plexus, right? That part of the chakra is the ego. So I really wanted to keep it on the outer area because I feel like that was the starting point. People were really holding strong to what they think I need to be heard. People did say to me often that everyone wants to, they kept saying, well, everybody wants to feel love. Everybody wants to feel love. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, okay, what kind of love? Can you even chop that down a little more? You know, do you feel that you are in love right now? And what does that even mean? Right? Is this a constant energy?
And you're saying and heard as well? Were there the same people saying loved and heard? Or was some saying loved and some heard?
The same people that kept saying love would either go to the heard area, like I want my voice heard. Everybody wants to hear, wants a piece of their pie. But then there would be people who say everybody wants love, and then they'll add, and everybody wants money and wealth and abundance. And I'm like, okay, see, that's where that conversation took wow, there's no middle ground here. It's either we're going to go material or I need complete humble pie here. But with the humble pie section, it's like, this is after you've experienced this crisis. You know what I'm saying? Like now I'm interested in finding out what these people were like before the crisis. How did this crisis that we're in shift that need of like, damn, I have to take a look at my own truth and realize that, you know, I need to bring it down a notch. I'm acting out of arrogance, out of too much ego inflation or whatever it is, because they were just so focused on the material. And so I did hear, like there were two people that told me, one lost a husband. She's very, very humble. But in losing her husband, I almost feel like her voice just started disappearing. You know what I'm saying? Like, because her reality shifted. And that was kind of hard for me because I thought she was going to pass away too at one point. So, you know, now I'm like, I'm going to give her time because I definitely want to pick her brain more. Like that whole shift of reality and what she was allowing herself to experience before this pandemic is now like turned upside down. Like so many people. But the people that didn't get hit hard, their thing was, I want to be heard, but the heard meant voice of power. If they wanted to rise to the top, it was about status. It was about people want to climb the ladder in whatever social sphere they're in. So if that meant you're from the streets and you want to get that respect in the streets, that's okay. So, but if you're
basically in one way or another, it's like when you say people want to be heard, what I hear when I hear someone say I want to be heard is I would like to be a part of the group, right? I want to matter, exist, and be a thing. And what a lot of folks who said when we interviewed us, we dug deeper, it was less about being a part of things and more about being on top of things. The dominance comes from people. But isn't that kind of curated within us? I mean, as we talk about generationally, we're talking about like some of the art and the things we deal with, and even like in the arts that we are, where people are often putting us in competitive places, where we really do believe, and I know folks who will tell me every sort of everything, that I can't win without someone else losing, without someone else suffering. And I kind of worry that one of the reasons why we allow poverty to happen and we allow pain and suffering to happen is we feel like those are things that must happen for us to get good things. I can't have good without someone else having bad. So if someone else is having a bad time, that increases my odds of having a good time. So as much as I, may feel some sympathy for you, I'm not going to stop it because, hey, it's going to be better.
Right. I actually, that reminds me of the book, Take the Great Leap, and just when Gay Higgs, he talks about this glass ceiling, right? That we can't get to breaking until we realize where that seed was planted. That makes us feel like that sense of sometimes like guilt. Oh, I can't have that. You know how we always say, oh, my whole team is coming up. If I make it, we all making it.
Yeah.
But let me not make it now. Let me not make it. Who has my back there?
Hoop Dreams. Do you remember the documentary Hoop Dreams?
Yes. Yes.
Quote, and it was such a beautiful and powerful, really well shot. And man, those kids, I know one of them grew up to be like a motivational speaker. And the quote that someone said is like, someone came up to me and said, "You're going to remember me when you make it?" And he said, "Well, will you remember me if I don't?" And that one really, really
exactly.
It's such an all or nothing. Yeah.
It really is. This is what I'm saying. Like, people were saying, again, I was like, damn, there's like the street versus the education community versus like the older generation. It's about reciprocity, right? Like, people, one truth that, again, it's this, I need to feel secure. So that includes knowing that your community has your back, or your circle, whatever that circle is. Do they have your back when you, in your mind, whatever you fear is the lack, or if you feel like the coming down of that status is, if they don't have your back, that will create some sort of animosity. And like, people they're really scared of that, you know? Like, I literally found myself like giving support to like other folks, you know, at work, or because this is, again, it's a tough time. We're all just trying to be there for each other. And even at home with my family across the states, and I could hear it. I'm like, damn, you know, not having that support is a universal thing. Like, if we don't have somebody that will have our back, that lonely factor is like detrimental to our health. Like, it's enough to like make you go crazy, or God knows what. It just creates such a devoid of like love and this need for compassion, all of that, if we don't have a sense of support. So people kept saying, family, everybody wants to be a part of a family. That was another one. They either said family or community. In my mind, that was like all the same thing. In my mind, I put it all together, but it was family, circle, community. What was another one that I remember hearing? One of the Uber drivers, he was like, you know what? He told me that, like, this analogy about the drivers and like the passengers, where he said, you know, people get in these cab rides and like they won't even say good morning. Mm. And I said, well, do you think that it's just that people are, you know, a little bit kind of like in their own world? They're living their own realities, and they're just like, you know, I don't have time for that human contact anymore. And then he said, when you see certain neighborhoods where I pick up passengers and they have manners and in other ones they don't, he said that's a problem. You know, this is all in Spanish, by the way. Mm-hmm. That was a whole, and he kind of was just like, I feel like there's this connection to technology. And then he asked me, you know, how I was like managing with having to deal with like the remote time. And I was just like, you know, I don't like it. It made me uncomfortable. I asked him, like, what do you do? And he said, you know, I just disconnect. Like, I'm doing this work here, but I want to speak to people. Like, I have been alone. I had COVID. It's over. But I was like literally zero contact. So there was like this need for human contact, this need for communication. And I would hear this in relationships of people in relationships with kids. They said, I had to be away from my partner in my own apartment, like separate from everyone. You know, there's just this very like human touch part of it all.
And well, so, you know, we talked about, you know, we've discussed the idea of like a connected truth, shared truth, and universal truths. And what you brought up now is more of like a universal need thing, which is really interesting. But I also want to ask you, please start wrapping up. So I want to know some other things about you and your conclusions. But real quick, I want to know how English and Spanish, where the differences were in terms of like what truth is. Because, I mean, what's ill to me about like English and Spanish as they're butted up against each other, especially in New York, but in America in general. Very different languages. English is a dramatic language, and, you know, Spanish being romantic. They had like such different things. The symmetry to it, the rhyme to it is different. Like I always talk about, I joke with Spanish, you know, it's like cheating because they have so many words that rhyme with each other. So it's easy to just like string. You know, as an English people, I'm like, no, rapping is harder in English because it's like it doesn't.
Those cognates, boy.
So tell me about the ways that the language stuff dealt with things that are true and different. And then I'd also like to know what, if any, conclusions for yourself that you've come to, or, you know, if you aren't settled on like these are conclusions, but like where you're at now.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So with the language thing, you know, being bilingual myself, I first tackled that with myself, right, with this word, because we we do romanticize it. I feel like there was a more spiritual approach to the Spanish conversations. Mm-hmm. Like they would bring God into it. They would bring this idea of the integrity of a person and how you approach things in life. You know, there was this poesy, like I see I'm taking it kind of like poesía about the way you go about your life. Like this idea of dignity that came up. Tiene que ser humilde, you know, humility is key. That was a big one. That was the elders talking the most about that one, right? But the shift in that arrogance versus being humble, that happened more with the conversations of my peer group. And I was just like, when did this happen? Is it because of the technology? But in Spanish speaking, that was still there. So it didn't really change there. Like we still heard the same thing about people not being humble anymore and very like this selfish need. But the idea of having dignity and like humility and like the greater energy that's guiding everything, that was definitely more present in the Spanish speaking conversations, like all the way. And also there was I'm going to go out there and say it. There were parts that were like very emasculated, like I'm a man, so this is gonna be my version of things, you know. You can't, it was very practical, like, you know, this is what it is. So that this is what it is with the male speaking conversations was the same as the English speaking conversations that kind of touched on the same thing, where it's black or white. And then I was like, okay, is this like a man thing? Or are we really like, this is what it is, no matter what? Because that never changed. That part never changed. Everything else, it could have gone more on the spirituality. It could have been more about individual action. But it was just crazy how like it was always the man who said that. Like I don't remember any of the females or, you know, those however they chose to be addressed. They didn't hit that area, but it was a male speaker and they felt like it was a black and white thing. That just across the border.
That makes it easier, right? If it is what it is, then we can do it. I talked about in Blueprints a little bit how there's the search for mathematical truth, and people will be like, well, 2 + 2 is 4, so that means it's a thing. But in math, actually, we're inventing a set of things. We set our own reality, just like we set our own reality in the poetry realm.
I've got this thing. Okay, so this speaks to where I'm at with it. Because again, these conversations are so good. And here's the thing, like I'm still in contact with these people, except for the Uber drivers. I really want to follow them. I want to see who they're connected to, because is there a connection between what their mindset is with all of this? And now that we've experienced this crisis together, was that a reset button for us? Like, or are we still going to be divided? Like even within the crisis? I mean, it's easy to say yes, but I really, really feel like we're more connected than not. And people are just really afraid to admit that, you know, because we're still in this like reclusive state where I'm not going to go outside. I'm very, you know, fearful of my own health or however things are being sold. And it's very fair. You know, I understand it. But I ended up coming up with this. It's like a simple equation that either my truth, you know how you cross cancel in multiplication, like fractions?
Yeah.
It's literally like, all right, I'm literally doing it right now because I want you to see this. All right. You know how you got this, right? But really, you know how a whole is the same numerator over the same denominator equals one whole. So it was like truth over truth equals truth. Right. Your truth over my truth over your truth. It's the truth. So there, like, I kind of want to play with that. Like, that's where I'm at right now. Like, how can I play with this idea of a fractionality, but it's really the whole, but I want to play with it as a pattern. You know what I'm saying? Because that to me became a mantra. It's a mantra now. Like, this is now a mantra. I'm probably going to end up with some stickers. I just claimed it, guys. Nobody copyright that for me.
I'm with that. Yeah, get up all over. So, like, my truth divided by your truth, we end up with one. But sometimes don't coincide. There is a remainder. And what do we do with those?
It becomes a mixed fraction, a mixed number. You know what I'm saying? That's, or an
that sounds like America. We a mixed fraction.
It really is. But for me, it's been really crazy. I was just going to tell you that, by the way, I learned that this conversation could not have happened if I wasn't just allowing it to pop up. Like, I couldn't just go up to somebody and be like, so what's your idea of universal truth? Like, people were like, I tried this in the beginning and it wasn't that weirdo style, but like, I really did not expect them to be so like closed off. Like, oh, what do you mean? Like, what's going on? Like, they treated it like a foreign object. But if I picked up on something that was going on in a conversation that I was a part of, I would run with that and then work my way into that conversation about truth and their perceptions, and like just taking the context and bringing it over to this area. And then that would just like open up the bottles, and like, here we are talking about truth, and people were very interested. They want to see me do this more. Like, now they're like, hey, are you still doing that project? I'm like, you should be having conversations.
I wanted to know, if you could help share for folks who are trying that, because I know a lot of people who do want to have, or at least claim they want to have conversations about what's real and what the truth is and how they can start. Yeah. So what you're saying is reach people where they're at. And then find, for sure. So if you want to find commonality, you must take the commonalities that you already know exist and give them freely. Because I'm sure some people still rebuff you, right? Some people still say,
oh my God.
Right? But
yeah, and I made people uncomfortable. Like, I was just like, hey man, I just, I'm just curious. They can say no. I was like, I wasn't offended. Like, I get it. I was just like, all right, man, I'll back off. I'm like, you're not saying much, but it wasn't about judging. It really was about having that interest and commonality. Like you said, meet them where they're at, for sure. They were just like very appreciative of that. But now they're very curious, like where this is going. And now I'm like, I definitely want to create a series of illustrations. Like, this is literally what it's going to be, a series of illustrations. I want to look more in depth into the different truth dynamics of these areas in life that we mentioned before. I'm really interested. I've always loved looking at text versus image, and I've always been interested in looking at ideas of feminine versus masculine and so forth. So now it's more about like these human interactions, but under these different perspectives, right? Not so much politically, like the way everybody sensationalizes it, but rather what goes behind it, like what you said, like how are we prepping things to then affect, choices? Like this is what's being presented to you, and we're going to have a psychological reaction to that, and then that's going to inform my decision, which is a decision that you hoped, or whoever the powers that be wanted me to choose in the first place, right? That's one area. But then there's the idea of love. You really got me thinking on that one. Like, what is love, and how are all these, like you said, like those novels, the novelas, the soap operas that I grew up watching, definitely set the stone. Don't even get me started on that. We should have a whole talk about that. I cannot.
Because we could talk about like reality and fantasy and that. Thank you for coming with me, Demo.
No doubt.
Everybody who's been watching, thank you for riding with us in the museum. We have one more performance that we're going to be having on Sunday. Kristen is going to be unveiling what she's been working on, not just with Demostina, but with all of these great artists who have been putting together her Memoryscape. So she's going to have the unveiling of the Memoryscape, and we're going to have some of the artists coming on and sharing some things. Thank you all for being a part of this. And Demo, anything else about your stuff that people should check out before we roll?
So this has been a crazy year for me, but I've definitely been working behind the scenes as best as I can. And I'm just excited. I feel like next year coming up, just be on the lookout. And I haven't been in direct touch, but those of you friends of the community, if you've been on this, watching us and following this, I see you, and I'm definitely holding you dear. So I'm going to put it out there. Instagram is still at Demostina. I'm still on the same Facebook, and I'm going to be releasing some stuff coming up. 2021, it's gonna be lit.
Right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.